before we begin, let me introduce our panelists from today. IFTAH BURMAN, the founder of Middle East Learning Academy. Mr. SAMER SINIJLAWI, correct me if I'm wrong, sir. My apologies. Chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund and Israeli activist of the Home Habayit organization, YIRMIYAHU DANZIG. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming on the show today. So our main topic, in the aftermath of Operation Guardian of the Walls, the one-year anniversary being marked today, Israeli leaders vowed a change in the equation. But did they mean what we're saying now? I'm not so sure. Let's take a closer look.
1 year ago today, Operation Guardian of the Walls was launched, marking the beginning of a new military campaign between Israel and the Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip, headed by Hamas. The operation came after weeks of escalating violence, spurring Hamas leader Sinwar to add fuel to an already simmering fire. Hamas fired 6 rockets into Jerusalem, and mixed cities in Israel, where Jews and Arabs coexisted, became extremely violent. More than 4,000 rockets were fired from Gaza over just 11 days. Casualties on Israel's side remained low due to the Iron Dome missile interception system. Over 200 Palestinians lost their lives in the crossfire. But time does not always mean progress. And evaluating the results of this operation are intrinsically linked to the current security situation in Israel. The present terror wave, actively encouraged by Hamas, often perpetrated by Arab Israelis, is symbolic of a conflict which is far from over. The chapter then and the one we are living in now are clearly connected. The fragility of internal and external threats ever present and growing stronger, but which one presents the biggest challenge to Israel's security? And how have dynamics evolved since the operation concluded?
So let's get to it. What is the biggest threat for Israel's security? Gentlemen, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance, and then we pick up the debate right after. So YIRMIYAHU, take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Thank you for having me. So I'll start off by saying that it's very difficult to deny that Iran, an external threat, is the most immediate threat, incredible threat to Israel's security. Yet we should not hyper-focus on that issue to the detriment of focusing on the internal threats within Israeli society. Just last week, if I'm not mistaken, a high-ranking officer of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard stated that even if we cannot physically destroy Israel, Israel will be destroyed from within. So we can fight our external threats while dealing with the very vital issue of our internal security within Israeli society.
Yes, YIRMIYAHU, thank you very much. SAMER, your take?
Well, there is only one and only threat for the Israeli security. It's the Palestinian, the occupation of the Palestinians. Everything is revolving around this sole issue. It's a threat because it is rottening the Israeli society from inside. It's decreasing and decreasing the morality of the Israeli state and public in front of the people, in front of the international community. So there is only one threat to the Israeli security. It's the Palestinian occupation. Once this is solved, everything will be okay. Israel will become a normal city that enjoying relations with everybody.
SAMER, let's put a stop right there. IFTAH, last but not least, your time is on.
Thank you for having me. Well, externally, I concur with my colleague saying that Hezbollah, Iran, but also the combination that we're seeing today between the different arenas, whether it be Gaza Strip with the West Bank, coupling with what's happening in East Jerusalem, and what we saw last May a year ago. This is posing a dangerous threat, and it's also an internal threat. There's a tear within Israeli society between Jews and Arabs, and I think we should address it immediately.
So we will address it immediately in this debate. Gentlemen, obviously it's a panel. Feel free to interact respectfully, of course, but I'm sure I don't need to remind you that. So my first question to you is very simple. Who is calling the shots now, a year after Operation Guardian of the Walls, Israel or Hamas? IFTAH.
I don't think Hamas is calling shots. Hamas very much wants to influence the conversation. Hamas is trying to get on the religious ticket and trying to accommodate points within the Palestinian society and within the Israeli Arab society. But this is not really what's motivating the government of Israel. It has a very popular conversation over Twitter, but Twitter is its own world, and it not necessarily applies for our day-to-day process.
But Samer, we are seeing that Israel is more on the reactive side to an extent, while Hamas has perhaps greater control over the events on the ground. What do you think?
I don't think so. I think Israel is the most powerful part of the equation here, and the most powerful side is always the controlling side. Let's go to the roots of the problem. The roots of the problem is that there are 7 million Palestinians who are either in not equal rights to the Jews in this land, or with no rights at all, like all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Relatively, they are only subjects. Controlling 7 million Palestinians by 7 million Jews is the cause of every problem here. Why there is resistance? Because there is occupation. Why people are turning violence? Because they are under pressure. And this circle is continuing, but the main reason is the occupation, and Israel has the upper hand. Israel can today unilaterally end the occupation, either by separation or by granting all Palestinians equal rights to this to the other Jewish citizens, and have a one state. So either one state or two states, and who decides is Israel.
Two states or three states, Samer, because we're looking at what's unfolding in the West Bank, led by the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah party, Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip, and the communication between the two, I wouldn't say a cohesive regime of any sort.
Well, this is because there is no geographical continuation and communication between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And what prevents the free communication between people? There is Israel in the middle, and there is no tunnel, there is no bridge between the two geographical areas. But again, it's who is trying to prevent the Palestinian elections? The one that has recommended to Abbas to cancel the elections was the head of the Israeli security, the head of the Shin Bet, who visited him at his home and said we cannot allow the elections because we have a threat of getting Hamas winning this election, which is not true. So what's preventing the development of the Palestinians, what's preventing the geographical and the demographical unity of the Palestinians is again the occupation.
Yes, and we will talk about the situation in the West Bank in a few minutes. But YIRMIYAHU, the Israeli strategy for many years have been to make a distinction or try to make a distinction between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. But we're seeing Hamas very much able to take over, quote unquote, the issue of Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, fueling or rather triggering Israeli Arabs to recruit to their cause. So the Israeli strategy in this respect not too successful at this point in time.
I would have to agree with you on that point. I think that the Israeli government is in the interest of maintaining the status quo, in the same sense that Fatah certainly has an interest in maintaining the status quo. I think it's rich to say that Israel convinced Abbas after nearly 2 decades of basically a dictatorship not to have elections. He could have done this before. So clearly we're talking about a situation in which both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority want to maintain the status quo. And frankly, we allow Hamas, by not confronting them and their consistent incitement to anti-Semitism, to violence, and to terrorism, to continue on this cycle of violence.
And Samer, I really have to ask you, we've seen Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, with his what now has become the infamous X speech. A few days later, we've seen an actual terror attack committed with axes here in the city of Elad in Israel. It's somewhat of a double-edged sword here from the Israeli standpoint, because crediting Hamas for those terror attacks is somewhat underlying its cloud, but on the other way around, not holding it accountable would mean what exactly?
Well, first of all, I would like to agree with my colleague here that yes, the Palestinian Authority does not have interest to change the status quo. They want to stay there in power. But the Palestinian people wants election. 80% of the Palestinian people are calling Abbas to resign, are calling him corrupt, are calling him a dictator, and they want elections. So the people has a will towards democracy. Now, is Hamas controlling the Palestinian street? Is Hamas controlling Al-Aqsa Mosque? Is Hamas really controlling all these attacks inside Israel? I can tell you, no, definitely no. Hamas does not control. Neither Abbas nor Hamas control the Palestinian street. The Palestinian street is reacting spontaneously. Most of the attacks inside Israel came by lonely wolves who have acted alone, including the most recent attack in Al-Ad, where three parties have declared the responsibility, Hamas and Jihad Islami, and also the military wing of Fatah, but none of them is really related, according to the statement of the Israeli head of the police, Kubi Shabtai. So Hamas is not controlling the situation at all. Hamas is doing some kind of show of a propaganda, is trying to ride the wave, to try to gain more public support, to try to be the center of the attention of everybody, and it's working. Everybody is helping Hamas to do this campaign.
Right. I think that we can definitely agree on that from all across the political divide on this specific issue. But IFTAH, one of another crucial element during Operation Guardian of the Walls was not just what we've seen on Israel's southern border, but what we've seen inside Israel in mixed cities, really breaking apart this illusion of coexistence. And what we're seeing now, this terror wave that we were seeing now, with some of the perpetrators not being Palestinians but being Arab Israelis, has Israel failed in the battle against Hamas over Arab Israelis?
First of all, we should mark our T's and dot our I's and say that the ones that came from within Israel were ISIS influenced or ISIS oriented, and this is not necessarily something that Hamas is involved. Yes, Hamas is giving inspiration. Yes, Hamas is encouraging, and we can look across the extremist map and see that these are the words of leaders of terrorist organizations, and that's what they do. The call that I'm missing here, and also missing from my SAMER, my colleague here, is a call for less violence, for moderation, for getting along. And I don't see that from leaders of Fatah, from Abbas and other leaders. I do see the head, the Fatah representative within Jenin commemorating the actions of a terrorist, rather than saying this is something to condemn. So if we should get along, if we should separate, if we should find a solution for us, it's not through encouraging violence, and this is something that I'm seeking and not hearing. Also, something that my colleague mentioned about 7 million Palestinians, that would be referring to Arab Israelis, to your question. And Arab Israelis are not living under occupation. We should try our hardest to incorporate Arab Israelis and bring as much of their identity into play, but also do it through education of Jews and Arabs within the Israeli society about the plight of the other, and encouraging coexistence in this way.
And ironically enough, this is all happening after, for the first time in Israeli history, we're seeing an Islamic Arab party actually participating in the political game here in Israel. Gentlemen, we're taking a very short break, but we're continuing the discussion right after, so you stay with us, and you viewers, you don't want to miss it. Back.